We are likely to have some more people wander in, but I will go ahead and get us started since it's 3:30. Hello, everyone who's here in person, and hello to people that are joining us via Zoom. Welcome to our second installment of the Spring 2026 Water Connects seminar series. This semester, we've named our series Catamounts, Catalyzing Change, because we're highlighting the impactful work of UVM Catamount alumni who are out in the world doing impactful water research. I'm Beverly Wendell. I'm the director of the Water Resources Institute here at UVM, and I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Kristin Raub. Her talk is entitled From Complex to Actionable, Co-Developing FloodSavvy to Translate the National Water Model Data for Use by Community Decision Makers. Just a little bit about our speaker before we begin. Kristin is a senior research scientist at the Global Resilience Institute at Northeastern University, where she leads several ongoing research studies funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and NASA, and the development of new projects. She's an interdisciplinary scientist who specializes in social science methodologies. Her background includes 4 different degrees. She has a bachelor's degree in marine science from Boston University, 2 master's degrees, one in chemical oceanography and one in environmental economics from the University of Connecticut. And she came here to UVM for her doctoral degree and earned a PhD in natural resources here at the University of Vermont. She also holds a graduate certificate in complex systems from UVM, and she was a 2016 Knauss Marine Policy Fellow. This unique background has shaped her present research, which is motivated by the fact that she feels climate change is really caused by and is impacting human communities. And therefore, it's quite important to her to engage with frontline communities who are key to, as she puts it, doing something about the crisis. Presently, she works to connect complex science, data, and information with those who need it, often in the context of resiliency planning, which is how I came to know her work, by leveraging social science and community engaged methodologies. Examples of her current work at the Global Resilience Institute include investigating NOAA's National Water Model applicability to communities, which is the subject of her work, and investigating the potential for NASA's Earth observation data to address environmental justice issues, particularly in communities of Puerto Rico. Kristin is based out of Vergennes, Vermont, so she's here in state. And outside of work, she enjoys venturing into the ocean as often as possible and traveling to visit friends across the country. Her talk will be about a half hour. We often ask people to hold questions until the end, but she welcomes questions as she's speaking. If you're joining us on Zoom, you could enter questions into the chat, and Hannah will help moderate those at the end of Kristin's talk. Thanks for joining us today. Go Catamounts.
I was like, I feel like that's also the first part of my talk, so we can skip right over it. Well, thank you all for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. As Beverly mentioned, I'm going to hit a lot of different topics, so if there is kind of a burning question, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, Otherwise, there is kind of some natural breaks here if we want to hit them. So I was asked to kind of give a little bit of my career path, which I'll go a little bit more in depth to from that. This talk will focus on community engagement. So I usually just like to start with just a couple of slide overview about what I think that means. We're all on the same page. I did this study that I'm going to talk about is a co-development process. So first I'm going to tell you about what the study was and why we co-developed this tool, and then I'm going to demo it a little bit for everyone with a caveat that I just tried to load it and we're having one slight bug with it, so you'll mostly see the tool, and then we'll have time for discussion. But again, if there are kind of natural breaks where we want to intermix the discussion, we can kind of take those as we go as well. So as we kind of already heard, my career path, I call myself an interdisciplinary scientist. I kind of had a winding path to end up, I don't actually call myself a social scientist. I call myself someone that does a lot of social science. So as Beverly mentioned, I was actually born and raised in Burlington. So Vermont has always been home for me. I live in Vergennes now as well. I started off going to Boston, where I was part of their BU Marine program, and I got a degree in marine science. So that's sort of where my love for water began, but kind of more from like a lab science, going out on boats, testing samples kind of perspective. Then I ended up at UConn's Avery Point campus, where I did a master's degree in chemical oceanography. So I was really where I was doing a lot of lab work. And that's kind of where my path towards people became, because while I loved the work, I didn't like being stuck in a lab, and I felt like the work, like it was just so disconnected from like what the ultimate impact might be. So that's where I then picked up a second master's degree, also at UConn in environmental economics, because that's where I figured, hey, if I could start bringing the people in it, or maybe if I can start to speak money, that'll kind of get me a little closer to that impact. From there, I spent a year down in DC as a Knauss Marine Policy Fellow, and that's kind of where my love of resilience and coastal resilience and sort of that practitioner side came in. So I was at the Coastal States Organization and Army Corps' Institute for Water Resources. So that's when I started to hear about there's so many tools, and I was working with coastal managers, and I was like, wait a minute, I thought these were for you. And that's kind of where, honestly, my project now, that's where the love of it began. From there, I came back to Vermont and did my PhD at Rubenstein, but even Beverly was just asking, even though I was at Rubenstein, I think I took 2 Rubenstein courses, and I was an IGERT fellow during the Smart Grid program. So actually my office was right over in Delahanty for most of the year. So I kind of pieced together a lot of things, and that's where I kind of swung full qualitative, and that's where I started doing interviews and surveys and things like that. And that's kind of where my love of the people became, and that was more coastal resilience focused. From there, I joined QUASI, which is the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Science Incorporated, which is the biggest mouthful of an organization I've ever worked for. QUASI is much cleaner. But I started there as a postdoc and then moved to a resilience research scientist, mostly because of this project that I will be telling you about today. And then just a year and a half, 2 years ago, I then moved over to the Global Resilience Institute at Northeastern University as a senior research scientist, which is what I've been doing ever since. So anyway, so that's why I call myself interdisciplinary, because I have done and have a lot of training and a lot of things. And I guess in addition to the complex systems graduate certificate, I'm now taking my free courses at Northeastern and also getting a graduate certificate in AI applications, just so I know more about it. So adding another one. Anyway, so that's me. And this is why now what I call my specialty is community engagement, because sort of the career path that I was on really was driven towards, I think people and working directly with people are often what people are trying to impact or do something about. And I just, to me, it doesn't make sense that if you're doing science for someone, if you're not actually bringing them along with you. So when I say community engagement, I mean an applied practice of involving stakeholders in decision-making, research, or a project. So what I like to say is social science is usually science about people, but community engagement is science with people. So they are with you and part of the process. And while I use the term community engagement, there's a lot of related terms. They're not synonymous. There's a lot of nuance to them, but just in case you're familiar with something else, you might have heard, stakeholder engagement or participatory research or any of your co-words, co-development, co-investigation, co-design, that kind of thing. So just so you know, like this is kind of all in that realm. Why I like community engagement, I often like to point to this NOAA Office of Coastal Management Introduction to Stakeholder Participation. There's a lot of studies in science that says there's a lot of benefits to doing science with folks. So for example, it can help you produce better outcomes and decisions. It can help you garner public support. It can help highlight important knowledge about natural resources or whatever your topic might be. It can help agencies understand flaws in existing management strategies. And then there's a quote, but there's also a lot of science that says if you build something with folks, they're actually much more likely to use it at the end of the day versus if you build something and hand it to them, it's sort of a guesswork. So to me, I think community engagement is a really good way to make sure that your work is actually directly meeting a need. It's more likely to be used. And then to me, the longer you have to argue your so what at the beginning of a, science paper, this kind of helps you shorten it in my mind. And then the other thing I like to highlight is that community engagement, I like to say it's an art and a science because it will not look the same in every study. So while I will, in this next section, talk about what I did in community engagement for my study, does not mean that that's the only way that this ever looks, or if you tried it yourself, how it would look in your study. It is a spectrum. On the left here, we have like inform and consult. I see those as the lower ends. Inform is like, hey, I did a study. You are the folks I want to know about it. I'm going to go give you a presentation. So you're sort of engaging them, but they're not really like involved. Consult could mean like you're doing a couple of interviews, maybe once, just to say, hey, I want to make sure I got your perspective. What is it? Kind of at lower level, up to like involve, collaborate, and empower. Whereas, maybe it's more regular check-ins, or maybe you start saying, hey, we're considering which path should we do? And then you actually start changing your project to account for those decisions. Up to empower, which is sort of the gold standard, which means, hey, we're considering A or B. And then your folks say, I want B. That means they have the power to make that decision. And then B is the answer. So just to note that this is all a spectrum. Okay, so that's sort of the really quick overview of the first parts. This is sort of the bulk of what I would like to talk about today. So I have spent the past 3 years working on a study, in the past year and a half, co-developing FloodSavvy, which is an online web-based resource which translates NOAA's national water model data into easy to understand flood risk insights. So first, I'm going to kind of go over what this study is and how we did the co-development, and then after this, I'll pull up FloodSavvy and we can kind of see it live. So I feel like here's probably the point. If anybody does have questions, you can just kind of raise hands as we go. So FloodSavvy originated as part of a big study. This is a Cairo funded study, if folks are familiar with Cairo, but the big question that I was trying to ask over 3 years was, how can NOAA's national water model be used in community resilience planning? And how can NOAA and the National Water Center help facilitate that use? And that's because the national water model has like a 30-day forecasting ability. So obviously it's been very explored in the short-term emergency management context. But the folks I was working with at NOAA back in the day were kind of curious, okay, but what about longer-term planning? It was really exploratory. Does it have any space in there? How could it be used? That kind of a thing. So in phase 1, we did a lot of interviews. I did interviews with NOAA and those who identified in the community resilience space to just understand what I call resilience planning, what does that actually look like in practice? And then how can the national water model support that use? And some of the biggest things we learned was that nobody's actually calling it resilience planning, even though technically by an academic definition, that's what they're doing. It's really, the term I use now is forward-looking decision-making about water. That sort of captures the diversity that's in that space. And then also we found out that like 65% of the folks we spoke with had actually never heard of the national water model before. But when they heard about it, they were really excited about what they could do with it, but they just didn't really have any examples of what that looked like. So then in the second phase, and I should mention each of these are about a year too. So in the second phase, we tried it out because nobody had used it before. We then worked with 6 different groups of folks across the US to actually try out, okay, you say you want to do this with a national water model, let's actually try out what this looks like to have you do this. And what we found in phase 2 was that not only was there a range of who the user was, meaning like what their own technical expertise was, ranging from like absolutely none, like they work with water data, but they know hydrology training, to like very advanced, but also what they wanted to do with the data had a big range. So for example, folks in Vermont actually just wanted to use it to start conversations. They just wanted to present it at Vermont Municipal Day. They didn't want to open it. They didn't want to like do anything complicated. They just wanted to say, hey, we want to talk about flooding. Here is a non-regulatory way in which we can. So that's like a non-technical use, up to very technical, where the national water model has 40 years of historical simulations associated with it. Folks were really excited about that. However, I call them my PhD friends in hydrology. It's Tony and Irene from Quasi, in case anybody knows them. It literally takes them to go and pull the data down, do anything with it that makes it even remotely accessible for these folks. And that is such a big mismatch between what the skills of our stakeholders wanted to do with it versus the skills that it took to have. So what phase 2 was really highlighting was a lot of accessibility challenges. So then that's what we did in phase 3, which is what we're going to talk about today. Is we did a deep dive into this. We wanted to really deeply investigate what are those accessibility challenges, how might we pilot ways to overcome them, and then basically how do we figure out how to make the national water model more accessible for these non-technical end users, which is kind of what I consider a lot of folks that are working in this space. Okay, so this is what we did. In our third phase, we were working with Vermont and Missouri, 3 communities in each, and we were targeting first boundary organizations, which is just an organization that's already well established and working in an area that already has deep connections. So in Vermont, we worked with 3 regional planning commissions. That was Windham, Mount Scottney, and Two Rivers Ottauquechee. And then in Missouri, our boundary organization was MOHIC, the Missouri Hydrology Information Center. They operate through Missouri's Department of Natural Resources, so at the state level. And then they selected 3 communities, Roaring River State Park, DeSoto, and Springfield. So this was these were the folks, when I say our stakeholders are our community partners, it was both the boundary organizations, and then in Vermont, they had towns as well, just more of them to put on a slide. So that's who we're talking about. So this was when I said community engagement looks different. These are the methods that we chose to use for this study. So first we did interviews with everybody. We did interviews with boundary organizations and our community and the local communities, NOAA, et cetera. And we tried to understand, what are your water challenges? What do you want to use the national water model for? Could you do that, et cetera? So what are those challenges, and sort of try to get an understanding of, okay, if you could wave a magic wand, what do you wish that you would have, kind of a thing. So those were all individual separate interviews. Then, because we knew that folks weren't super familiar with the national water model from those earlier phases, we brought in our NOAA collaborators, and we call them a national water model deep dive. It's just they came in and they gave a really thorough overview of what the model is so that we could make sure that our stakeholders really knew what the capabilities were. It wasn't just this idea in their head, but like really what it could do. And then we hold collaborative sessions. So this is where instead of having everybody individual, we brought everybody together as a group of our community stakeholders, my research team, NOAA representatives, and then we all kind of collaboratively reacted to the aggregate interview data that we had. And then also, then we were asking the question, okay, what is it that you would want? Could we build or do with the national water model data? And the reason I call that collaborative is that way, you know, all of those perspectives are equal. So that way, if the community said, like we've heard in the past, oh, could you just tag it in with FEMA? NOAA goes, no, we can't. We need that separate, you know, so it's sort of a make sure that everything is realistic and everybody's voices are heard. So I like to show this. So this is one of the slides that we were using in these sessions. So this is, well, this is NWIPS, the National Water Prediction Service, but this is one way in which you can access the National Water Model. It's live also, so water.noaa.gov in case anybody wants to go. This is the landing page. Like, so if the community who, you know, just wanted to access this is typically how they might go there. So it's, you know, a map of the US, lots of dots, and then there's all those drop-down menus. This is what we were asking our stakeholders is what other resources would help you access and use the information available from the National Water Model to use in your work. So basically, if this is what's available now to you, is there something else that you wish that you would have had? So then we did kind of a needs matching, I guess. So this is in social science, I would call this a thematic analysis, sort of, is kind of what we did. But basically, across the top, all of these C's, those are different capabilities that either through those interviews or through those collaborative sessions, we heard from our stakeholders about something that they wish that they had. So that included, you know, a regionalized map interface. Instead of it landing on the whole United States, they wanted it to snap right into their area. They wanted to just simply see what the flow of a stream or a river would be over time, instead of having to navigate all of those different interfaces. They wanted to see FIM extents. Right now, FIM is available for 60, 80% of the country. Most of the country will be all of it for rest of this year, but I think it's only available right when a flood event like is actually active. They wanted to see it kind of anytime, you know, or more readily available. They also wanted to be able to download results and identify vulnerable areas to them. So then on here, we have our 6 different communities that we worked with. So then the green boxes are just any time that a community also said that they wanted that capability, we just highlighted it green. So this is actually a slide we used in one of our sessions with them and said, hey, based on what we heard from you, this is what we're hearing. The ones in red are the ones that we think that we want to prioritize based on your needs. And then that's kind of the process that we would follow. Is we never did anything without kind of consulting and, you know, working with them as we were developing it. So then we entered our co-development process. So after that, we kind of said, okay, we have a plan of what we want to do. Now we actually started co-developing it. So we started with an initial prototype, which is that's where Tony and I were using Quasi. That's where they were fantastic. And I keep mentioning it like it's separate. We were all very together in all of these meetings, I should mention too. But here we started with a prototype, and this is what you kind of see on the top is they said that they wanted FIM extents. So you can see this kind of outline and like a little slider bar. That was something that they could use to, you know, visualize a flood extent. On the bottom, we know that they wanted to have flow time series. And we also heard repeatedly that they wanted access to that historical data. So we gave them historical and forecasted. And then throughout this process too, it wasn't just like a one-off. We were doing like bi-weekly emails, either just as a, hey, this is what we've been working on, or we would have different requests for information from them. And then we were also doing pretty regular meetings. So every time that we ran into like a design decision or something, we wouldn't just decide, we'd go, hey guys, here's an update, what do we want to do, kind of thing. So it was very collaborative this whole way. And then we formally soft launched the tool, and then we did a lot of user testing. So with user testing, well, I'll show you FloodSavvy. There's a bunch of different pages associated. So that included literally putting up each page and kind of asking a series of questions about it to kind of get opinions, but then also task-based user testing. So we would actually say, hey, for your community, could you identify a river? And then could you identify if there's a flood? And then we just stand back and ask them to explain their thinking. And then this was a really great way to both understand better what they actually needed and what their challenges were, but then also kind of if there was any bugs or things. So what you'll see is this is the original prototype. See how the flood outline is kind of really dark? One of the things we heard was, oh, we wish that was more transparent. So that was a really easy fix. You'll see in this later one, now we have a transparent flood layer because people wanted to more easily see what was beneath it. Or in this one with those flow time series, we kept getting questions about, okay, well, is that normal for my area or like high, or I don't really understand, because like sometimes like if you see a flow in the future, it'll look really high, but then you look at the units and it's just because it's scaled down so far, it's nothing, but they were going, oh no, there's a flood. So there's kind of some misinterpretation. So we added these quantiles. So that's something, I think those are pulled from USGS, but that'll just show you, I think the range is simply much below below normal, above normal, that kind of thing. So that just kind of gives them like a rough sense of like, okay, is what I'm seeing normal or not for my area. So then some key lessons that I like to highlight as part of this development process is that we were working with an existing tool. I've gotten this question a couple of times in different talks, is like, I feel like co-development is often, I'm building something new from scratch that's never been done before. What do you do if like you already have a tool that's existing? I like to highlight that the National Water Model already exists. It will exist and it continues to exist outside of what we did with FloodSavvy. So just so you know, I personally think that you can do kind of this co-development engagement at any time. Obviously the gold standard would be from the beginning before you start, but that's not always possible. So I just like to highlight that this was done after. And also, for the record, FloodSavvy is not meant to replace the National Water Model. We view it as another way to access it or a lower barrier to entry. So that's another thing too, is it's not replacing. We would hope that it is a tool that then redirects to formal NOAA services, but with a better understanding of what you're looking at. The second I really like to highlight is I think this project was successful because of our interdisciplinary team. So I represent sort of the social science community engagement piece, but we could not have done this without our literally lockstep collaboration with our hydrology team members. And then outside of that, we also could not have done this without the really direct NOAA collaboration and our community collaboration. I think you take away any one of those 4 parts in the project, probably would have done something, but it would not have been what it is today. So, you know, I think sometimes people think about collaboration as like, you do your thing, I do my thing, we'll talk later. This was literally like weekly, everybody together, team meeting kind of thing. So I think that's also why this worked. The other thing is that in this whole project, if you look at my original proposal, FloodSavvy is not in there. Building a tool is actually not in there at all. This was iterative and intentional to be able to react and kind of adapt to what we heard along the way. So there's kind of like an art to doing that, I think, both in a proposal and an execution, but kind of what we did was we built in these intentional inflection points. Like after the interviews, we paused and kind of asked, is there anything we need to change about our coming up plan? After our collaborative session, okay, now that we have new information, is there anything that we need to change? So sort of, it's a tricky thing to do. I think scientists, you know, we love a plan and we like to stick to plan, but kind of the plan is that the plan will change. So it can be done. And I think it's really also, if you're going to do community engaged work, I think it's absolutely essential that you leave room to then accommodate for the new things that you learn, because the community has knowledge that you don't have. So, and then 2, I like to highlight that data availability does not equal accessibility. Just because you put something on a website, just because you as a PhD scientist think that a figure makes sense, does not necessarily mean that those who you intend to use it are making the same, it's not making the same sense to them, you know, because technically all of the data from the National Water Model that we use in this project is available. But as we kind of showed, it's not necessarily meeting those decision points. So just to kind of, I like to put myself in other fields all the time too, just because, you know, it's nice to hear what other people think. Sometimes we all like to talk to our own disciplines all the time. We're like, of course, everybody knows this. That's why engaging with communities can kind of help you, like, I don't know, there's always a disconnect whether you realize it or not. So that's why I think community engagement is like important in that process. And then finally, community engagement moves data from useful to used. It's kind of just a derivative of that last point. But what I'll show you with our FloodSavvy demo is that we have a lot of really great examples. Like for me, anytime, you know, like there's apply for this award or whatever, and you always have to go, how is your research impactful? I don't have to dig that far. That's kind of like selfishly, it's super easy, you know, because there's direct examples of like, hey, this is literally how I'm using this. This is literally how I'm responding to this need. And that's super rewarding as a scientist, you know, and also then you know that it makes everybody happy. You know, with every one of my studies that I do, I'm always asking myself, how do I do good by science? How do I do good by my community partners? And then how do I do good by my funder? And there's always kind of, you know, so it's always a good perspective to kind of have, and what they need are all different. So it's always kind of this balancing act, but it does really help to make sure that your science is actually used and useful. Okay, so maybe I'm going to pause there briefly. We will do a demo of FloodSavvy, but that's kind of a lot together, but that is what we did to create it. And now I'm going to show you a little bit more about what it is as well. And it is live too. So if anybody, there'll be links and things if anybody wants to pull that, but maybe I'll just pause there briefly in case we have questions. Yeah, if you could, yeah, as we wait.
Anyone have any questions?
So I have thought a lot about the water.noaa.gov landing page and how it came into existence. What would you recommend to our colleagues at NOAA next time they want to create something like that? Or sorry, not something like that, but an effective tool for communicating the results of their science.
I mean, so to me, the simple answer is just talk to your end user. And I feel like that's often the thing in whatever study I'm working on. Every time that you run into this, oh, should we do this or that kind of a thing? That's usually my default answer is, well, shouldn't we just ask? You know what I mean? So I think that, you know, and like, unless there's unless you are literally creating something by a scientist for a scientist of which you are a part of that community. And of course you would, that's how your brain works. So you would know. To me, that's the first thing. So I do think, because remember that Knauss fellowship, I'm pretty sure I was working with NOAA while they were doing some stakeholder meetings way back, because I was a 2016 fellow and the water model came out in 2016. So I think there was something related to that, but like, it's not, it just depends, you know what I mean? So, and then that's something that we've been working with too, with FloodSavvy, is that we don't have any conclusion right now, but that's something that we've been working with NOAA is, you know, they have their plans laid out, but is there anything from how we have now designed FloodSavvy that might be useful to them in the future? Like one of the things that we keep hearing is they have this 40-year historical simulated data available from it that has not really been a focus of NOAA. Like it's available, but they've really been, for obvious reasons, focusing on the forecasting. But that's something that we have heard every single year in that study is, oh man, they have that historical data and people get so excited about that. And that's something that through our conversations with NOAA, they go, oh, that's new, or they didn't know that there would be such excitement. So we don't have like, oh, this is the plan to do that, but that is something that because of the study, I know that now NOAA is aware of that. And that's something that, I mean, there's 1,000 things I'd love to do for research. So, you know what I mean? We'll see, but I would hope that they would maybe see what we did and then community engagement would be kind of the short answer to that.
Yeah, because it definitely seems like a product made by the people who know it. Yeah. But not by the people that use it.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is my understanding is that the national water model was really kind of developed for sort of the NOAA regional offices, sort of for their kind of core partners. Whereas what I see FloodSavvy doing is kind of expanding that potential user base. Like I think that we have kind of unveiled a whole new group of folks that were really not the intended audience for the national water model, but now are very interested in it. And it could actually increase it could really increase its use and its impact. Yeah. So yeah.
So what would a staff person at the Regional Planning Commission, what background would they need to have in order to be able to access this and utilize it for their communities?
FloodSavvy or the National Water Model?
Well, either.
So our goal is that FloodSavvy is for basically like a 101 user. I'll get into that. We provide a lot of other resources associated with it. And that's something that, like, one of the quotes that I'll share of one of the examples is we worked with Roaring River State Park, and like what they said afterwards was, yeah, when I first started working with you guys and I went to water.noaa.gov, they were like, I didn't know what to do with it. It was a lot. And then I'll show you FloodSavvy, but by working with FloodSavvy and kind of in that simplified interface, kind of better understanding what does stream flow mean versus flooding versus all these kind of, it's hydrology concepts. And then we also have a 101 National Water Model Users Guide. By working through both of those things, they say at the end, and I quote, now the National Water Model is not so bad. So to me, that is the goal, I look at it as a lower barrier to entry. It's opposed to, typically the folks we're working with, they're using water data in some capacity. That's something that we saw. Maybe they're not a hydrologist, like I'm not a hydrologist, but they're using and thinking about water all the time. So to me, that is the person that should be interested in this. And then, regional planning commissions, they have varying, depends on who they have on staff. Some of them do have quite sophisticated, somebody that does have a lot of knowledge, other folks just don't. So it really depends on who you have on staff, but the goal should be simpler, and hopefully our guides kind of help you. And I'll show it to you, like we have some,
they're up there. The only issue is I don't think that people online can see it.
Okay. And then
oh wait, yes they can. Never mind.
And then how
Good work.
do I navigate there?
You might have to stand on the other side of the podium.
Okay.
And use the mouse.
Okay.
Which is very funky, but
okay. Okay. Well, take me a second.
Yeah,
Ooh,
it's
okay.
a little like,
oh my gosh.
wait, hit the, okay, if that pops up again, we can hit the
Okay.
and get rid of it.
Well, okay, this is very zoomed in, but this is what I like to start at. This is water.noaa.gov. This is what you see today if you go there, you land in it, you get the United States, you get all these little green dots. And then you have all of these little drop-down options on the side of which you can kind of navigate. So this is the starting point. This is National Water Prediction Service, NWIPS is what they call it. That's how you get to there. So then, okay, it looks like I lost some of my tabs.
If you hit the like the explore bar on the bottom, they're on a different window, if that makes sense. Like next
It's okay.
to Zoom. Okay.
We can, ooh, why is this so little? Okay. Do you know why the view is like that?
I think you have to scroll up. Like get into the,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
I can't see what I'm doing. I'm sorry, everyone. Is there? Okay. I don't. We'll just. Now I lost my mouse. Okay, we're gonna just start here. Okay. So you go to FloodSavvy. The most important thing, this was a big NOAA thing too, is there's a disclaimer. This is an experimental product, and also we are not advocating that anybody makes like big $1 million life-changing decisions. This is hopefully a tool in our guidance. Our goal is it will direct you to other products. That is the goal of this too. So you get this thing. If we go to our landing page, oh, it's so small. Okay, so you come to the front, you get this bar that slides across the top. This is just highlighting some of FloodSavvy's key features, but then right off the bat, you get these tiles, which will direct you to each of our 6 communities. So then if we go to, let's pick Roaring River State Park. Okay, if you would see, basically we'll zoom you right into this area. So this is like the watershed directly surrounding Roaring River State Park. And then this pink outline is just sort of their thing. And then this green outline is their park boundary, which is something that they gave us. So then if we kind of scroll in here, you can then click on any river or stream reach, and then you'll get 3 options: flood map, historical, and forecast. I don't know what this is going to look like. I did have these preloaded, I just can't access them. So here's our historical, and then you get this little stage flow viewer on the right, and then you can also see, except for now I can't.
Oh, you've got your scroll bar on the side.
I know, I can't see it though. Okay,
Oh.
it's just, I don't know why this is so large in this view. It messes up with the window size, so this is just,
display settings.
anyway, it's the display, anyway. It looks better if you're on your laptop. If you go to floodsavvy.aussie.io, there's a link later, but you can also look at this yourself and it'll look a lot better, I promise you. So anyway, if I could do this, we could do USGS imagery to get the actual things, and then we can do Roaring River State Park. So basically you can actually see each of these little pink spots. These are a campground that Roaring River State Park gave us, and then you can actually see kind of underneath, you can see them. The forecast is right under this, but here with our end dates, you can go and adjust this range. So let's take it back to 2021, except for where's my okay. Okay, apply. We'll give it a second. So this is where, if folks wanted to see what is happening in the past once this loads. So then we can kind of see this goes back to 2021. So we can actually see that they definitely had a couple of flood events in the past. It looks like 2022 is somewhere between like 5,000 and 6,000, and then also one in 2023. So then what you can do is go over here to the stage flow viewer and say, okay, well, let's adjust it somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000. And then you can kind of see the flood extent viewer start to do this. So then we know that this is something that, well, I know because we worked with them, that they definitely did have flood events in the past. So this kind of allows them to go and then look at what a flood event might be. And you can do the same thing with a forecasted. It would look cleaner on the forecasted, which is below this. But then what other folks wanted to know is, okay, well, is this normal or not? So you can also toggle on and off quantiles. So you can zoom in on this, it'll look cleaner. We just have a lot of data up on the screen. But this will show you below normal, above normal stream flow. So you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, is this actually a peak, or is this actually normal from our region, kind of a thing. And then one of the things that Roaring River State Park is wanting to do with this is, this park is located right outside of the Ozarks. So apparently they are like a hotspot for getting new park rangers in all the time. So the folks that we worked with, they've been there for years. So they have just, you know, a lot of the local knowledge, and they understand, okay, this is what past events were. This is, you know, like they were telling stories about, yeah, normally, because they lost a big river gauge a few years ago, they would go and park a truck at like a bush across a river. And they know that once that bush starts moving, that's when they got to go start evacuating campgrounds. So they have that kind of like local knowledge, but the new folks coming in don't. So what they want to do is to go and come up and pull up an event and say, okay, look, we had this event a couple of years ago. This is roughly what it looked like. And then just actually have this like on the screen and actually talk through, okay, this is what we did back then. Now for training, what would we do hypothetically if this event happened 2 weeks from now? Like, what do you do? Like they have everything from they have to go and knock on RV doors to leave little hang tags to kind of, anyway, so it's sort of like, what would they do? So that's sort of the training piece. And that's things we also heard from in Vermont as well. So it's like some of us, I mean, I'm a lifelong Vermonter, but there's a lot of, at least what I've seen is a lot of staff turnover in some of these positions, or, you know, I've been to Vermont Municipal Day and it's kind of shocking how young a lot of folks are. Like maybe you moved in from out of state. Some people, flood amnesia is the thing. And that's often something that we've heard across a lot of our communities is, okay, well, I know that this is flooded really bad. Maybe it was 10 years ago. You only moved here 5 years ago. Or, hey, we haven't had an event in a long time. They want to do this. So if some local town manager, you know, who's often volunteer capacity, you know, thinking about potholes and budgets not flooding like I am all the time, how do you try to have a conversation with them about maybe not citing a building in that particular area, or, you know, that kind of a thing. So it's something that's where folks are really excited about the historical data as well. Oops.
Can I ask you a question about those quantiles?
Yeah, or you can try. I'm not a hydrologist, so I can direct your question to the right people.
Are they sourced from the GS data?
I'm pretty sure they're from the USGS.
Okay, because the GS page has a lot of lingo like that for flows that match the color dots. I was curious if you took that schematic.
I'm pretty sure they did. My understanding is what we were trying to do is not really create any new data. It's all like all of this data is purely just national water model data. Yeah, and then anyway, so but I'm pretty sure the quantile piece that was somewhere from USGS, but unfortunately that is about as sophisticated as I can.
But if they're sourced from the USGS, then they would only be available at limited places where there are USGS gauges. I'm thinking it might actually be the national water models.
It might, yeah. So that's
those are
something
available for all rivers.
and that's something where I can have my email. So that's my colleagues are Tony and Irene. They're the ones that did all the. They physically put all of this together, minus some of the writing things that's what my team did. But that's where, if I can't answer the question, I'd be more than happy to pass that along.
It's not big deal. I was curious.
And if you hit Microsoft Edge down there, you should be able to get your other windows.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we also, what you would see up here, if this were sized differently, would be home, maps, resources, and about, and etc. We have a lot of resources page, both specifically about FloodSavvy. So that's what I mentioned. Some of the question was like, who is this for? This is the goal where we weren't just trying to leave this up there with nothing. So we have these scenario exercises, which are like PDFs. So this starts you off from the landing page and we'll kind of walk you through with lots of screenshots how you would go for a region and access historical stream flow to evaluate like a past flood event. So this would talk you through how to adjust the date range and then also kind of how you might interpret whatever that data is. And then we also have things, you know, like how would you monitor a stream flow for, you know, if something is forecasted. And the goal there too, we are not saying that you should go and make decisions with this. The goal would be, do you want to look at this and have it be a little more user friendly? And then ideally you should be calling up whoever your NOAA contact is, or, you know, going to actually other official forecasts, which is why also, well, they're on the other page, but we have lots of resources. What we also have is community narratives. So yes, we focused on 6 communities for this study, but we wanted to make sure that we were actually telling their stories, so that if other folks wanted to maybe see what they did and maybe be inspired to do it for their own communities, they could. So these are each a story, just like a written PDF narrative of who the community is, what their challenge was, and then how they're using FloodSavvy and or the National Water Model to address it. So I think those are pretty cool. Can't get to it here. We also have one for the National Water Model, or NWIPS specifically, which I will show you. We have a National Water Model tutorial, which I think is great, but it also has links to a lot of other really great NOAA, like official NOAA product resources, like a lot of really great story maps on NWIPS and FIM and National Water Model and all that kind of stuff. But then what we did is I found that a lot of those resources, while they're beautiful and they're great, they're kind of sort of created like for somebody with a higher level of technical knowledge than either a lot of the folks on my team or a lot of the folks we were working with had. So what we really wanted and what we didn't see was like a really basic 101 user's guide. So this is something where literally we had a fantastic undergrad who literally the task was, you are as smart and as anybody that I'm working with, but you are not a hydrologist. Use yourself as a guinea pig. Like what would you want to know? What are the questions you're asking? And that's what I asked my social science team to do. And then we also worked with our community stakeholders. So this starts off very basically with just, what is the National Water Model? What types of information are available there? What questions could it help you answer? And then most importantly, it walks you through step by step right from that landing page with lots of screenshots and basics about what is it you're looking at, you know. And like, honestly, I learned a lot from this. You know, like, I didn't know you could do half the things in the National Water Model by going through this. And then it'll help you. So how would you use NWIPS to access a gauge for river location and then an ungaged river location? And then most specifically, it's also kind of helping you link that information back to some of those decision contexts. So I also get asked sometimes, okay, well, FloodSavvy is only for those 6 communities just because that's what we were piloting this with. But to me, this resource, this is for anybody, you know, and I think that this is kind of a cool way. So that's the goal too, is that you would take inspiration from what we have done about, oh, I didn't know you could use that data for that purpose. And then, you know, ideally you would have access to FloodSavvy to do it. But if not, all of this information is still available. Like, you can still go and try to find it. So that's kind of where we're at now with the project. That's sort of the goal, is to kind of see how it might expand or others might use it. But anyway, so that's kind of it. I promise this looks better on an actual, like,
It did.
yes. It loads if there's bugs. That's also because Tony and Irene are still, like, right now I couldn't get the forecast data to load earlier. They're still playing with things every once in a while, but this is live and launched, and lots of things I would like to do now in the future with it, but unfortunately this is the conclusion of this particular study now. So yeah. Yeah, or I'll jump back up.
It seemed like there was 6 communities that piloted it, or is that all that the data is available for? If you live within the boundary of those 6 communities?
Yeah, FloodSavvy specifically. Yeah. That's what FloodSavvy is available for, but it uses National Water Model data, which is available everywhere. So basically it's all the same NOAA data. We just package it via those 6 regions, because that's, you know, it's a deep dive. We had to see if this was going to work for the study. That's one of the next steps if I could wave magic wand and get funding, would be, now that it's built, because obviously this was very labor intensive to do this because we didn't know what we were doing to start, you know, we didn't have an idea. That's my first question, is how easy would it be to pick up a new location, you know, because my social science question is, are these the capabilities and needs that folks would actually want, or are there a lot of other ones, like, is that consistent or not consistent? And then Tony Irene's question is, well, is it actually really easy to kind of scale this? You know, there's a whole, I'm not the expert there, but that's my understanding. That's a lot of complications when you try to build something that's quite large. So there's lots of science questions.
Can you use it for other regions, or it's only usable in those 6 regions?
It's only available in those 6 regions. So like the first map with the highlighted area, you can only click on river and stream reaches in that highlighted area. You can't click on them outside of it.
Maybe this segues off of that question. Can you tell us, was going to ask you, but if you can't do this at the same time, it's okay. Because when you showed us a place in Missouri, and I think everyone in the room would be interested in the places in Vermont.
I know.
So if you can't do that at the same time you answer my question, that's okay. But I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about your interactions with those 3 RPCs in Vermont, what you learned, what they asked for. You know, there are some people in the room that are from parts of Vermont that aren't in those 3 regional planning commissions, but might like to know more. So tell us more about the Vermont cases.
Sorry. Okay.
It's really okay if you can't do it at the same time.
This is the Mount Ascutney region. So it's sort of like, these are different, anyway, boundary. It's basically, I mean, it looks and functions basically the same. We just had folks just give us different regions or different things that they wanted highlighted in particular areas or things like that. Like, for example, like the campgrounds in Roaring River State Park, that's just the one I just did a conference in Missouri, so that's the one I have on file. But the question was, tell us
more about, as you worked with these 6 different communities, I'm curious what you learned from working in the communities in Vermont, what hadn't occurred to the team, you know, you or the other 2 technical people.
Yeah, I think, well, yes, Vermont is unique, but I think that was also one of the things that was kind of interesting, is that there's a lot of commonalities about the kinds of things and the kind of challenge that folks have, across Missouri and Vermont. Because honestly, originally back in when we first started phase 3, I think my original conception was resources plural. Like we might find a couple that might want the same one, but that's originally how I wanted. I think as it came up, one of the surprises was that we were able to build one. Noting that table that I showed earlier, there were still other capabilities that folks had requested, and we focused on this again because this was kind of a pilot study. So that I think sort of a derivative of that is I was actually surprised at how consistent things were. And then, in Vermont, I guess it's consistent to me because I've been hearing about it for 3 years, but some of the things was just how simple the use cases can be sometimes. Like flood amnesia comes up all the time. It's just that folks want to start a conversation. And I think that's something that I've heard in other conferences as well. Like I remember one time at a Cairo conference, somebody came up to me after I gave a talk and they were like, so what do we need? Just more data? Is it not accurate enough? And it was a data question. But to me, the perspective was, it's understanding the local context of these stakeholders. In Vermont, we have a lot of volunteer select board members, where it's I was interviewing folks and they were like, oh yeah, I'm a former librarian, took this up as a job, and they're worried about budgets and potholes, and literally people are coming to them with a slew of different challenges. So while I am thinking about water all the time, and obviously with the Water Resources Institute probably thinking about water all the time, that is not front of mind for some folks. So the power of just a simple conversation, I think that was one of the things that I still like to highlight, because obviously FloodSavvy is fancy and it's all this graphs and cool things, but just putting the national water model up, because it is non-regulatory, it means that it's not going to change flood insurance. It's not going to mean anything. You don't have to do anything with the data. That's a really powerful tool, Another thing, which again, maybe isn't specific to phase 3, but was kind of all of it, is people really like the national water model because it is federally funded and it will always be updated. That's something that we see. I guess some of the FEMA maps are going to be digital, so I haven't sat in on a training recently to understand most of that. But a lot of older maps where you have the map and it's done. It just sits there and it's not necessarily updated. People like the national water model because it is consistently updated. It will kind of always be there, and it's free. You can go and get a special study done of your area, but that takes a lot of money, and we have a lot of teeny tiny towns in Vermont that you can't afford that. So what we were also finding is that people were very accepting of the fact that the national water model is not perfect. And again, I'm not a hydrologist, but that is what you hear, is it definitely works better in some areas and not, and it's always continuing to evolve, and that, some people are very wary of its uncertainty, but that's something, especially in Vermont, they're like, yeah, but FEMA maps are wrong anyway. That's just something that we kind of heard a lot, is people were actually very accepting and understanding of that, where that's always NOAA's number one concern. Yeah, but the uncertainty, are people okay with that? How do we communicate that? We never really ran into that big of a hurdle. Yes, you need to communicate it, but people don't have data at all sometimes. And that's what we were hearing. Some data is better than none. And that's why the goal is, we're not telling you to make $1 million decisions. We're not telling you to do anything. Better understand the data, go to the official NOAA products. That's who you work with. You know what I mean? So anyway, yes, I'm talking about Vermont, but this is also consistent about what we heard in a lot of places. But those are from some things from Vermont too.
I'm curious how you would think about, so obviously you would like to scale this to more than 6 locations. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts, if you have particular regions you're interested in, or whether that's determined from community connections you have, or just generally how you would approach scaling this up if you were to receive more funding to do so.
Yeah, well, I have an idea. So there's 2 ways. To me, there would be a cross region, how many would you do? So with Missouri, they have a lot of state parks, and we also have very deep connections there. And they're sort of it would kind of, Missouri is a very interesting state, I guess, too. Kind of, it would allow you to hit a lot of different kind of water vibes, I guess, for the non-technical term, you know what I mean? So that would be one thing, is to kind of focus on not just everywhere. It would be places that both have water challenges and people kind of a thing, but maybe focusing on state parks. I was actually just at a Missouri State Parks conference a couple of weeks ago. That would be one, to see, okay, across a singular state, what would that look like? And then I know we're focusing on Missouri and Vermont in this, but in prior studies, we've engaged Ohio and Minnesota and Oregon and North Carolina and Colorado and folks like that. So what I would also like to do is then do kind of cross state. So not across a whole state, but then also kind of spot check, because again, as I mentioned, that's part of what I'm curious how deep the engagement would have to be, because I will not lie, community engagement work is very labor intensive. I think it's totally worth it, but we get funders and they're like, oh, can you do that for a small amount? And I'm like, it's staff time. It's expensive. It takes a lot of like intentionality, and you have to do it right. It takes a lot of time. So that's the question, is how much would you have to do that, you know? Because again, people don't like to be just handed a tool, they want to be brought with it. So that's sort of the science question I would want to answer. And then as I mentioned too, with Irene and Tony, then it would be, well, how easy is it to build this up? How much back-end maintenance, like how do you support something that grows bigger, you know? Or, you know, if we could wave a magic wand, yeah, we'd love to take it to the whole United States, but I think that there would be steps before you could do that, you know? So, and then there's also NOAA's interest and lots of other kind of questions, but yeah. So the cross state plus then cherry picking a couple other to do a second pilot of how hard or easy and how consistent or inconsistent are those things.
I don't know about other states, but in Vermont, we've got the conservation districts, which don't follow the boundaries of the regional planning commissions, yet they're really focused on water. So when you were working with the Vermont groups, you were working with the conservation districts as well?
So our boundary organizations were the regional planning commissions. So that's so then we were also working with representatives from communities in their region. So that was sort of the pilot that we were doing here. But again, that kind of becomes the other question, is if you're going to take this across a whole state, that's another question of like consistency, is like, you can look at this as like a proof of concept project. Like I see our work, this is not like a done thing. I see this as like a first step. Like, does it work? Is there interest? Would this be something to continue? But it's questions like that. That's where I see that there's so much other research and work because of these boundaries, right? You know, like if you were going to take it to all of Vermont, people want it to zoom into their local areas. You know, that's a basic question. What kind of feature? How would that look? I haven't studied that one. I don't know, but for that exact reason. So anyway, RPCs, because of that's just how we facilitated this study, but that is the exact kind of point where like, this could look very different if you start poking around in other areas. So.
And this is only modeling fluvial inundation hazards.
Yeah, we definitely heard that folks want like, well, it's the other question we have is like, could you do this for drought? You know, like, I don't know, or like there's other places like out west where it's more about like water budgeting, you know what I mean? Like so there's lots of other secondary, or not secondary, but just kind of, yes, this is focusing on flooding specifically, but like there's lots of other things you could.
This is kind of a follow-up on that. It's why I asked you what you learned in Vermont. I noticed your disclaimer page said kind of in bold, this does not include fluvial erosion hazard. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? And like, did the stakeholders that you work with
that's
came to that point?
Well, because
what's flooding mean in Vermont?
Well, it means a lot of things, you know what I mean? And in Vermont, obviously there's other issues of like, this is not necessarily for flash flooding either, you know what I mean? And we also know that our river corridors move, you know, obviously that's a big focus in Vermont. So that was one of our disclaimers, because we were not creating new data. We were only working with national water model data. You know, obviously in Vermont, that's the first thing you hear is, well, can it account for this? You know, and it does not. So that's sort of more on the hydrology question side and I think that's sort of the thing is, would you be trying to do it to the national water model, and that's something that would be able to account for, you know what I mean? I think that would, I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but I guess that's sort of the question that we are working within, is we are not touching the national water model. We are using its data in a different capacity. So I think there's the whole Cairo consortium that's doing lots of research, and some of it is actually physically to work with the national water model and things like that. But yes, fluvial erosion, you know, flooding in mountainous regions, you know, the flashiness, that kind of a thing. There are definitely lots of different areas that this does not cover. There's also even basic things of like our stakeholders, they would love depth. We don't do depth. Yeah, that's definitely, I know it's on NOAA's radar and things like that. But I think we're sort of at a cross between what's available from the national water model, what folks want, what other folks can be researching, and then kind of. But what I think the takeaway is it's the packaging, you know what I mean? Like, I think that if you were going to do fluvial erosion, possibly, you know, or like, I'm also interested in total water level. You know, that's another big bear. Like, this is not coastal, but like, if you're going to take this to a coastal region, that's much different challenge to model, let alone communicate, you know? So, but this type of approach, you know, engaging stakeholders, understanding what they want, I think that's the transferable piece.
Mm-hmm. I came in late. Did you have any contacts with the GS?
With what?
The USGS?
Not specifically for this study. We mostly focused on NOAA. I think we did interviews in phase 1 with a couple of folks from USGS, but not specifically on FloodSavvy.
Athena Clark is with USGS National, and she's really just pioneered a similar case to yours, right? Like, she can read maps, she can read gauges, but her neighbors are like, I don't even know what this means.
Yeah.
So she had this idea of a flood inundation map. I'm here, is the water gonna be up to my knee?
Mm-hmm.
And she might be a good contact for you, because
Okay.
what she's been, and kind of why, right? She's been working on very similar things like this, kind of use cases, and it's been able to explode. But another follow-up to that makes it a little bit more important from the GS side is we just cleared a big hurdle for our data to be included in flood prediction, in a sense, like flooding, like monitoring for the preservation of property and life.
Mhm.
We passed a big hurdle that said, if we do everything wrong, we're not wrong, like typical government.
Yeah.
So with that, Athena's model becomes quite relevant and essentially legal in the GS. Might be a good combination
Yeah.
with what you have and what she's working on.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. I'm definitely interested in where this could go. Honestly, as a researcher, I would hate if this was the last I ever touched this or did any work with it, you know?
Mhm.
And again, I genuinely think proof of concept first step, this is something that folks are interested in. And also it looks very different than the national water model. So I think that there is a lot to explore, you know, and a lot of nuance. And I would also be really curious to see what something like this would do with lots of other data, you know, so.
Yeah, I was just thinking with what she has set up and that, like in what you have, it looks like you would be able to say, okay, this is happening, and then say, yeah, this is NEHA. That, you know, more than just a gauge height, in combination. Like, the visuals and the user interface is very nice, because you're right, and I think you're being very polite. It's very difficult to interact with those models.
Mhm.
And the weather, you know, the national water model and such.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice job.
Thank you. So we're gonna get the slides back up. I was just gonna leave a couple of links.
Yeah.
Or
Do we have any questions on Zoom that you want to?
We do not have any
Okay.
questions.
I
We
just have a
have
few.
about 3 minutes, so last chance for people in the room. Ask if they're in.
This is sort of more of maybe a technical question that you don't want to answer.
It's okay. I know the folks who can answer it, so I'm always happy to pass it on.
It seems like the unit of analysis within FloodSavvy is the reach,
Mhm.
which is a pretty abstract concept
It's
for
yeah.
the average user. And so I'm curious, like, what was the decision-making process behind it? Is that purely based on
It's
national water
national, it's
model?
national water model. Yeah, it's basically they were taking what was available from there. So we do have a multi-reach feature that was added later. It only, I think it's up to 4, I think, and they have to be connected kind of a thing, but that I cannot explain to you why that is challenging. I do know that that is a challenging thing because of rivers are different, and when you do the slider, you have to do special things, which is about as sophisticated as I can say about it. But yes, that's basically how the national water model package is my understanding. So that's sort of the why certain things are available as they are.
Gotcha. And yeah, then the follow-up is just like, is there a thought about creating a different point of analysis or unit of analysis, right? Like point-based, like essentially like the dumbest version of it is like, I live here, is it gonna flood? Right, here's my house, is it gonna flood?
So
Like that's kind of like the question that we're always trying to answer as like managers or advocates is like, what is gonna happen?
So that's
So
been an interesting thing with NOAA, because I know that they were very interested. You can read the disclaimer like on the website. They were very interested in that. And I know that we had some folks who wanted to like push it out to like realtors or things. And there was some pushback on that because again, what NOAA is very clear on and what we want to make clear on is the kinds of things that you should be using both FloodSavvy and the National Water Model for, and what you shouldn't, because it is not a perfect resource. It is not like, yep, this is exactly what's out there 100% of the time. So because of that, my understanding is right now, no, because I think the issue is you don't want folks I don't know, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, I think that's where the uncertainty question comes in. I think they're comfortable with, this is a first step resource. This is a understand it better and then go talk to the actual experts kind of a resource. But in terms of this is now you independently as a singular like resident making a decision about something based on this information. I think there's a little bit of like, I don't know if the data is there yet type of a thing. And again, I can't speak too sophisticated on that, but that's been a kind of a big discussion with NOAA, and they're okay with us because it's not NOAA branded. We've got our disclaimers, like they're good with it as it is, but that was something very clear about. Some of our users wanted to bring it down to the residential layer, and that was sort of a little bit of and that's why our engagement with NOAA was important. That was something that we wanted to be clear that was not one of the uses we were advocating for.
No questions on Zoom. We're at the 4:30 mark, so Kristen's willing to hang around for a little bit to talk to people. We've got a little bit of a more focused discussion planned with a few participants who are here in the room. Lots of information up on the screen for our Zoom participants to access. I'll just close by saying that when the Alumni Association heard that we were doing this, they dropped off a bunch of gift bags for our alumni. So the gift bag got started by the Alumni Association. We've loaded it up with a few extra things from the Water Resources Institute for you. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you. This is our study website. I know FloodSavvy has its own link, but everything is linked right from this page, the use cases. We have also a really great thing. We did a live, our formal launch of it, where we actually had each of our community partners present their own experience. And honestly, if I could just snippet any of those, they're really great. It's a long thing. If you just want to skip towards our actual stakeholders talking about their own experiences, I think it's fantastic. So that's all right on that page if you want to learn more. Anyway, but thank you for your time, everyone.